Okay, we're off the air over there, and now we're over here. Let's get to it. And welcome to the RealAg Radio After Show. I'm your host, Shaun Haney. It is great to be here today as I adjust the sound. So great show today. We really focused in on the markets here today with Chuck Penner of Left Field Commodity Research. We covered a ton of ground, really some interesting takeaways that we had with Chuck. We also heard about a conference coming up with Organic Alberta. And we also did a little bit of top ag news stories. We also had some feedback from some people, a little bit of a whole bunch of different angles on stuff. I really do appreciate everybody's feedback. And we all don't have to agree on this show, but it is very fascinating to get everybody's perspectives, compare, contrast, and maybe learn a little bit from each other as well. We are live, so if you have any questions or comments, please participate. We had lots of participation yesterday. It's fantastic stuff. Let's keep the ball rolling here and keep up the momentum and keep those thoughts coming. Okay, so what we heard from Chuck Penner today is really a little bit more. Chuck described himself as a bear. I don't know if I would do that. I think I would be more in the Chuck is being conservative. Chuck is being maybe a realist is maybe the best way to put it. I think that's fair. There is a lot of reason, and we've talked about this before. The market has moved in the last 6 weeks from one of absolute exuberance to one where there is a justification to be concerned, even though the war in Ukraine continues. Okay. And Chuck made an interesting point that farmers typically look at themselves as price takers. And there was a period on the 21 crop where really they were price makers. And their ability to hold the inventory moved the market. And that seems to have disappeared now that there's been some rain in certain parts of, for sure, the prairie provinces. There is obviously concern on some of the weather in the Midwest, but things are a little bit dry in Ontario, in some parts in Southwest corner. But for the most part, we've worked our way back to a little bit more of I don't know if it's a normal situation, because we're so realistically we're at pretty historic highs still, but we're off of where we were. There is really no question about that. And I think it creates some uncomfortable moments for people. There is people that have been selling throughout. There are people that have really held on and done nothing. Everybody has a different reason for their strategy. I'm not going to criticize anyone's strategy. That's not my place to do this. My place is to bring up what people are saying at this given time relative to conversations we've had over the past few weeks. And all you got to do is say, look at here, let's do this one. This is December spring wheat. Okay, look at that chart. We're looking at, what's the 52-week high on this sucker? 14 flat. So the 52-week low is 696. We have now traded down to 1040 from those highs of 4. So we've knocked $3.50 off of spring wheat for new crop. So it's traced downwards. So if you have, basically, this is from the conversation with Chuck. So if you have sold nothing to this point because you were worried about, say, production issues based on what happened last year, where you were so like the paying out to get out of those grain contracts where you couldn't produce the volume. Pain is painful and you're never going to forget it. So there are people that have really done nothing. What do you do going forward? That's the question, right? There's always the hindsight, what we learned in the background, but I'm always more interested in, okay, considering all of that, where do I go from here? And that is the much harder question. Looking in the rearview mirror, it's like, oh, you should have sold at $14. Yeah, okay, woulda, coulda, shoulda, hindsight, right? And there's other factors and variables that come into that too, especially if you're in an area like that as a drought zone, or if you're in Manitoba where things are flooded out if you're in the southern part of the province. So there is variables there that I think need to definitely be considered. So one of the things that Chuck mentioned today was, it is hard to come up with the argument that we're going back to where we were. That the idea that we're going to go back to that $14 where we were on spring wheat, it's hard to come up with that argument. And so, Chuck talked about if you are holding out for that return in canola as well. If you look at the canola chart, it's just as ugly. It's recovered a little bit where spring wheat hasn't, and we talked about that in the discussion. But if you're betting that it's returning back to where it was just because the war in Ukraine is happening, Chuck Penner's opinion was that's a tough argument to make based on the fact that you can't say that we're going to have the same production challenges in Western Canada like we had last year. So that there is that. He also mentioned that the plan, your marketing plan, really has to constantly be reevaluated. Okay? So to go on information from 6 weeks ago, you can use that in the back of your mind as one of the components of that plan. But we had a message from a listener during the show, and I'll read it to you again. John said, I appreciate these weekly market conversations. If I was going on what I heard 6 weeks ago, I'm not informed. I'm disinformed. Timing of info is critical to any marketing plan. Thought that was interesting. Okay? Because I think he's right. So we don't forget what we heard 6 weeks ago, but we have to complement it with new information as it progresses and as it develops, right? There was a time not too long ago where I think it was, this market will have a hard time retrenching until we know when there's a conclusion with the war in Russia. It seems like we've kind of moved past that point now, and we found a justification to go lower. And we heard that today from Chuck Penner. We heard it last week from Joel Vaclavic from Standard Grain. And we heard it the prior week, I believe we talked to Ted Seaford from Zainarag Hedge. All three of them pretty much saying the same thing. Three random people. Joe and Ted know each other, I know that. But Chuck, he's in a different geography, talking about different markets, and it's the same sort of message. So, constantly be re-upping the marketing plan. The other thing that Chuck said that I think we had a little bit of fun with when it comes to the marketing plan is offense versus defense. And this is kind of my perception as it sits here today, is that we have moved from where it paid to be on offense. And what I mean by that is a farmer holding inventory, looking for the right time to sell. That inventory was in tight hands. It was extremely profitable to hold onto that inventory in very, very tight hands. I will not sell. I don't care what you tell me. Forget it. It's going higher. And it did. Absolute shout out and respect to everybody that followed that strategy. Because, if you did sell at some point in that spring wheat chart, somewhere around $14, congratulations. Good for you. Overall, the market, though, feels like it has moved to more of a defense mode. We're talking defense now. We're defending the downside. We're on defense. And so what are our strategies? What do they need to be to protect ourselves? Some are using options as we heard from, actually it was Brian Voth was it Brian Voth? It was Brian Voth 2 weeks ago. That's what it was. So it went Chuck today, Joe was last week, Brian Voth the week before, and then Ted Seaford from RealAg Edge. So we got 4 people sort of saying the same thing. Chuck and Brian know each other. Ted and Joe know each other. Not that that matters, but it's a random sample, okay? It's the sentiment of the market at this time. So we've moved from where we're totally on offense, press ahead. We're going to watch this sucker go higher. Now we've pulled back. We've maybe put a little bit of fear into people, a little bit scared. Although I do have people telling me that, you know what, we're going back to right where we were. And maybe we are. But I think some of the mentality is on the marketing strategies a little bit more to, I got to defend the downside here a little bit and reevaluate what percentage sold I am in this market on the new crop. To add complexity to it that Chuck and I didn't even talk about, what is really the idea about fertilizer prices as well. And how do you time sales in new crop with fertilizer purchases to sort of manage that margin? Managing the margin, absolutely critical. The other thing we talked about, Chuck brought this up, was food prices. He believes food costs, even if commodities slide back, food costs will remain high. And I compared that to, I can definitely swing that and agree with that. If you think about what happens with oil prices and gas prices, right? And this is, like I said on the radio, very anecdotal. Let's be honest, very anecdotal, okay? But it seems when barrels of oil get more expensive, the price of gas follows very, very closely. Oh, price of gas got to go up. Oil's going up. Geez, these are in line. These are in parallel step. And then when oil prices drop, gas prices have a hard time going in the same direction, just as fast, just as quickly at the same time. There's always this lag. And then, so on the way up, it's like, oh yeah, well, just the cost of oil going up and the gas is very tightly tied to it. And this is just how the market works, you dummy. And when it goes down, it's like, oh, there's a lag factor. Well, where was the lag factor on the way up? And that's the same thing that'll happen with food prices. You mark my words, it's easy to this is one of the challenges with inflation. At the very beginning of the inflation discussion, we heard so much about how the discussion about inflation sort of brings inflation. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, okay? It's easy for companies to justify price increases when we're talking so much about inflation because you've got cover. You've got cover. And so Chuck making that I think very smart point that even if the price of wheat drops considerably even from this point, don't expect food prices to follow as quickly. And that is going to probably pump up and hype the discussion about big bad food companies and what they are doing and the margins that they are taking at this point in time as the consumer really, really does suffer. So give me your thoughts on any of that. I think it was a very, very fascinating discussion. I thought Chuck did a really, really good job. And not exactly saying, hey, here's where the market is going to be in 6 months, but almost reconnaissance, sort of like here's sort of putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. Because that's a part of this that I think is really, really important. What else did we hear today? We heard about the Organic Alberta Conference. Let's see here. Top ag news stories. Speaking of food companies, did you see this one? Is it? Yeah. Kraft Macaroni and Cheese is changing its name after 85 years in the U.S. It's changing to Kraft Mac and Cheese. So Kraft Macaroni and Cheese is changing its name. See, I think I gave it the new name to the old name. So the name will now be Kraft Mac and Cheese. This just makes sense. This is actually what we call this thing, right? It's mac and cheese. It is the staple that got all of us through university. There's no other way to put that. It is definitely the fact that we were eating a lot of mac and cheese. Here's another one. We didn't get to this on the show, but this is an example of, we'll see how that goes. This is from the Globe and Mail. It's time to bring back indoor mask wearing requirements. Some health professionals say amid concerns of potential surge in COVID-19 cases this summer. In fact, according to Alberta emergency physician Chuck Worster, public health authorities across the country dropped the mandate prematurely. Worster was quoted as saying, there wasn't any indication that it was safe to do that, pointing to the influx of COVID-19 patients he has seen in the emergency department as never really having stopped. Masks should always be the first thing that we use and the last thing that we get rid of. We'll see how that goes. When I read this, I just sort of thought, ship has sailed. It would have to be, to me, it's not about the COVID cases. And once again, this is outside. I'm not going to pretend like I know much about infectious diseases, but it would have to be a really bad variant, not just cases, but death, in order to get people over the hump of wanting or complying with mask wearing again. It is odd to me, really odd actually, the bizarreness of the mask mandate still in airports. Like, you can go pretty much anywhere in the country without a mask. Okay? I think everybody has lifted their mask mandate in different provinces. Yet, I can go to a restaurant without a mask. I can go to the mall without a mask. I can definitely go to Walmart without a mask. Yet when I go to the airport, gotta wear a mask. And on the airplane. Ugh, I hate the mask on the airplane. My glasses are always so fogged up. So let's hope that this doesn't come to fruition, as it is something that will face a lot of pushback for, I would think for sure, at least with the real agriculture audience out there in rural areas. Since we were on the air, actually, the press release from the government came out. So we do now have the Canadian fuel standard, the regulations, or the Canadian fuel. It's the clean fuel regulation is what they're calling it. And the details are out. They have delayed the timeline of implementation, compliance on this to July 1st of 23. So just, basically after Friday, as of Friday, it'll be a year. They have a year to comply. It originally was supposed to be January 1st. And, but they've also increased the stringency. So I haven't got to, I saw the press release in the inbox. Kelvin sent it to me. I haven't got to it yet, but, they're looking, reducing the quantity of carbon per unit of energy of gasoline and diesel by about 15% by 2030 from the 2016 levels. That's up from 13% in previous drafts. So increasing the stringency, but pushing out the timeline. We will definitely try to get Minister Guibert on the RealAg radio show to talk about it. We have been in contact with his office over the past couple weeks, and we will see how all of that goes. So, yeah, interesting stuff. So, there was a piece of feedback on the show today. I just got to find it here. Just give me a second. Yesterday here on the After Show and RealAg Radio, we talked about fertilizer tariffs. Okay. And we talked about how I've had a hard time getting my head wrapped around the idea that we're putting tariffs on Russian fertilizer. Now, I should say that with caveats. So there is a difference potentially between sanctions on fertilizer today going forward versus what happened in the 22 crop at springtime. Okay. Although even if we move forward on sanctions on fertilizer for Russia, or sanctions on Russian and Belarusian fertilizer going forward, we're the only country doing so. So we heard Minister Bobo say on yesterday's radio show that other countries are looking to Canada and what they're doing. Well, that's fine, and they probably are, but we're the only country that is putting these sanctions on. I have to repeat that. It's not like we are a part of a bigger club. We are the only ones, and everybody else has justified it to not do it, not because they don't support Ukraine, it's because they're worried about food costs. We are too, but we haven't connected the dots. Where we have real trouble is on the fertilizer that was purchased last fall, long before the Russian war, and that having a tariff, those farmers being subjected to a tariff. It's a crazy tax. It's nuts. I don't understand. I got an email from Danny and he disagrees. He says, I just don't see how publicly crying about a 35% fertilizer tariff on Russian fertilizer is helpful to send to the Canadian public. War is hell. At least Russians aren't invading Canadian farmland, littering them with bombs and ordnance, and we're having to farm wearing flak vests, helmets, and machine guns, and hoping our tractors and combines don't explode while we're out in the field. So, yes, we should be thankful, Danny. I agree. Very much so. I couldn't imagine what those farmers are going through. Yet I will repeat, the fertilizer that came in from Russia and Belarus that was paid for last fall, how does that help? How does a tariff on that fertilizer, how does that help the Ukrainian farmer? Zero impact, except putting revenue and money in the pockets of our government. I think this is something that is easy for the Canadian government to shift on. I do believe that, obviously, Canadian Finance Minister, Deputy Chrystia Freeland, this is a big issue for her, and rightly so. She's an expert in Ukrainian history and the long-standing conflict with Russia. And Canada's possibly more clouded on this than other countries are. The U.S. is able to separate. The U.S. is able to support Ukraine, send military aid, but also realize that they also need fertilizer. So the other component here is no matter what the Canadian government decides on the go forward, just say so. Just say, listen, we are sanctioning fertilizer out of Russia and Belarus for the go forward. Canada, find other suppliers. Just period. I hate to break it to you, but some of that fertilizer will probably come out of Russia and Belarus into the U.S. because they're not tariffing it, and it'll come then into Canada. So there is and we saw this with soybeans. We've seen it with canola. The market has a way of finding a home for some of this product. We had another piece of feedback from Brad. I'm not sure where Brad is from. Brad is from Manitoba. And Brad says, hey, can you guys try and find out more from BSF on this new seed treatment? This is huge, probably one of the biggest things right now in Western Canada. 300 series in Vigor canola is not growing. It just sits there, and that has been treated with Vericorus seed treatment. Brad has 1,000 acres of it, and you can't imagine how many acres there are. That is a huge liability that I am sure they are not going to want to pay out across all those canola acres. Thanks for email, Brad. As I said on the show, I think this is something that is yet to be determined. BSF's, we had Brent Collins on the show yesterday. Many of you sent in, hey, a great interview, good interview, liked it, didn't like what I heard. This is a question that I have, and some of those were fantastic. I think I should have more of you in the room with me when we're asking questions. Some good ones. And I thought of some afterwards too after I listened back to it on the air. But he did reiterate, to be fair, BSF takes care of its customers. Invigor takes care of its customers. So that's on them once they sort out what the problem is. Okay. So that's definitely a big topic of discussion here for a lot of people. I'm going to drop one more on you before we go here today. Okay. I was on Canada Talks 167 today. On channel 167 on Sirius. There's a Canadian news talk show. And I'm on there once a month. And today we talked about the census. And we talked about the increase in female farmers and talked about how we're finally recognizing female farmers as such, not necessarily farmer's wife or as the homemaker, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. We've moved to where, yeah, I'm farming with my husband side by side, or hey, I'm the farmer, he's the one that works in town. Whatever. The good stuff. What Jeff asked me, Jeff Samet, the host, that I hadn't really thought of before. Jeff asked, is there more pressure on female farmers? And I said right away, well, I'm not sure I'm the one to ask since I'm not female. But what came to my head immediately was, I'm not sure there's more pressure on female farmers. There may be more spotlight. Now, internally at Real Agriculture, we got a group chat, and this is being discussed right now. And the majority, I think, sort of say, pressure, spotlight, same thing. So probably is more pressure. So if there is more pressure, is that internal pressure? Or is that pressure that's external? Meaning, sort of like when an athlete signs a big contract, right? Ooh, there's a lot of pressure on that to him to perform. Yep. Sign the big deal. Sign the big deal. A lot of pressure. Is that the same? I think it's different. But I'm willing to get I really would love to hear what you think on this. This is one where I'm not really sure what the actual answer is. And many of you who are female may have a lot to say about it and provide some perspective, which would be fantastic. Because I was a little bit caught off guard by the question, wasn't sure how to answer, got through it, but I would love your perspective on that as well. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to the RealAg Radio After Show. And, of course, we will be back again tomorrow with RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, SiriusXM. Do not forget to, if you missed the show, to download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, or, of course, go to realagradio.com where you can always stream it. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with real agriculture, and we will chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.